This year, the residents of the city were waiting for the approach of St. Valentine's Day with particular anxiety and trembling in the knees. For the 5th year in a row, brutal murders of young people were committed in the city, who, shortly before their death, received a black valentine in the form of a paper heart with a message inside. Judging by the rumors, after reading it, it certainly had to be burned and prepared for a romantic meeting with one's own death. Someone thought that this was an ordinary youth horror story, and someone thought that another elusive serial killer named Bloody Valentine appeared in the city. A distinctive feature of these murders was that all as one, the dead, were young guys aged 20 to 25 years. Before death, all those killed had to endure terrible torment, as a result of which, their bodies turned out to be disfigured beyond recognition. In all cases, the hearts were removed from the guys, which were never found later. The insides were invariably laid out separately, as if in order to once again humiliate the deceased. As they wrote in the newspapers, the killer opened the chest with the skill of a surgeon or a pathologist, which involuntarily suggested that representatives of these narrow-profile professions were involved in the commission of murders. Police checks and raids succeeded each other in a kaleidoscope of investigative measures. But there was still little sense. Igor has always been fond of mysticism and read books about elusive maniacs, whose terrible deeds fell into the world archives of criminal history. Of course, the guy could not ignore the case of Black Valentines, which for 5 years now have been received by selected poor fellows, who subsequently died a terrible and painful death. Igor was in his 3rd year of economics and always considered himself an intelligent and rational person. Therefore, he could not understand in any way exactly how this mysterious maniac chose his victims. Well, he couldn't just point his finger at random and send a black valentine to the first person who came across. And in general, what was so special about it? Why did all the guys invariably burn it after reading it? The guy puzzled. Since over the past 5 years, one guy has invariably died on Valentine's Day. This February 14th should not have been an exception either. Unlike the inhabitants of the city, Igor did not feel much anxiety about this. Basically, this was due to the fact that he was extremely shy in communicating with girls and, ironically, could not count on receiving a black valentine this year. Yes, and in general. How does the killer know about my existence? No, this is impossible. Going to bed, Igor thought with a smile. Valentine's Day was supposed to be tomorrow and the guy knew that on this date, nothing would happen to him exactly. The next morning, Igor got up earlier than usual. This was not at all explained by the fact that he was waiting for any manifestations of activity on the part of the female. The guy simply had nightmares all night, in which hearts torn out of his chest swam in rivers of blood, and the screams of the murdered victims sounded in his head like a hellish, posthumous chorus. Waking up in a cold sweat, Igor jumped up in bed and looked longingly at the clock on the bedside table. Despite the fact that they showed 6 o'clock in the morning, it was still a bit dark outside. Lying in bed, Igor thought about who would get this very black valentine today and whether there would be one at all. From the state of sad thoughts, the guy was brought out by the noise outside the window. At first, Igor decided that these were just tree branches, which, under the influence of the wind, scratched the glass with their woody claws. But then, listening more carefully, Igor realized that these were not branches at all, but most likely some kind of animal or bird. The scratching on the glass was so annoying that Igor could not stand it and, getting up from the bed, went to the window. Sleepily yawning, the guy opened the curtain and saw something that made his heart instantly sink into his heels. A Valentine's card was attached to the back of the window glass, the color of which horrified the guy. Oh my God! Wow, this is the same black valentine in the form of a dying message. How did she get here? Carefully opening the window, Igor whispered. The boy's hands were still trembling, and perspiration appeared on his forehead. Carefully removing the valentine from the window, Igor realized that it simply kept on the droplets of moisture exuded by the glass as a result of the temperature drop. Sag black, like the soul of a sinner, the heart a little more, it would certainly slide down and would remain lying on the windowsill as a mark of death. Realizing that the killer deliberately scratched the glass in order to attract his attention, Igor shuddered and abruptly slammed the window. The black heart-shaped valentine was unpleasant to the touch and was made from a material whose origin remained unknown. In addition, in fact, it was not the dark structure that gave it such a characteristic color, but the black paint. Picking up a roughly executed heart, Igor saw that his fingers were smeared with the dark substance. Damn, what an abomination! The guy grimaced and carefully opened the valentine card. Inside, in small, compact handwriting, was the following phrase. Today at 20B at the city cemetery. Alley 34. Serial number 217. If you're late even for a minute, your parents will die. Burn after reading. P.S. Happy Valentine's Day. Igor read what he had written again and felt a spark of fear emerging somewhere in the depths of his soul. But in order for it to flare up into a sizzling fire of panic, the guy lacked just the realization of what had just happened to him. Lord, how did he know about me? How did you find it? Where did he get my address? A disturbing thought rushed about in the head of the guy. Having memorized everything written in the valentine, Igor decided to do as the killer advised him and immediately sentenced the hated black heart to death over the fire of a lighter. The idea that it was clearly not worth joking with this sick bastard was stubbornly beating in the guy's head. Fuck knows what's in his head. What if his mother really watches after work or slashes his father with a knife during the night shift? It is only necessary to tell Kolya. Or maybe even go with him. Both are not so scary. Trying to cope with excitement, Igor thought. For a couple of hours, he simply tried to digest what he read, and then realized that it was time to tell his best friend about what had happened. But when Igor tried to dial a friend's number, the indifferent voice of the mobile operator told him that the subscriber was out of range. Yes, where is Colleen? Today is Tuesday. It's on the weekends that he goes to his grandmother. But now it's the beginning of the week. The guy's on. Time inexorably brought him closer to the evening denouement, which for some reason was supposed to take place in the cemetery. Or maybe contact the police? But what am I going to tell them? What burned the valentine? Or the fact that I'd heard enough horror stories on my own head and imagined myself a victim of bloody valentine? Thought Igor. On the other hand, he understood that something still needed to be done. Igor did not want to risk the life and health of his parents. The guy had no idea what would actually happen in this cemetery, but now, at least, he knew why the dead guys did not tell any of their friends about the valentine. Surely, they, like me, were intimidated by this bastard. But can I prepare for the meeting? Take, for example, a baton injury. You won't kill him, but the appetite from hitting such a bullet will disappear for a long time, Igor reasoned. He decided not to tell his parents about going to the cemetery. The guy knew that bloody valentine had not made a single mistake in 5 years. Therefore, he is unlikely to make one now. Come what may. I'll come to this shitty cemetery, and then we'll see. But why is Kolya silent? Is it really that hard to answer? Igor whispered with anguish. In anticipation of the evening, time dragged on like rubber. The guy has already twice taken out his father's injury from the hiding place and twice returned it back. An alarming thought was spinning in my head. Should I go or is it better to wait at home? Indeed, in fact, the death of the guys occurred only on Valentine's Day in February 15th. Everything fell into place again. The risk was great, but Igor decided to go anyway. With the trauma at the ready and a knife in his pocket. With such weapons, he could upset the killer to the point of impossibility, after which he could move to a safe distance and call the police. Of course, the guy's reasoning looked at least naive. But he still couldn't think of any other way out, and therefore a trip to the cemetery was inevitable for him. Since Igor has always been a cautious and smart guy, he decided to leave the house a little earlier than the appointed time. "I'll come. I'll look around. What's what? It's unlikely that this bastard will kill me in the cemetery. All previous corpses were found early in the morning in the city park area. But he is unlikely to succeed in catching me by surprise," the guy thought. The city cemetery with all its appearance evoked fear and spiritual anguish caused by the feeling of the proximity of the kingdom of the dead. Clutching his father's injury in his hand, Igor slowly passed the gatehouse and walked along a dark alley. The caretaker, of course, was not at the workplace, and hardly anyone would agree to spend the night in such a terrible place. Before going to the cemetery, Igor probably tried for the 100th time to call Kolya, who seemed to have sunk into the water. "Well, and figs with you. I'll manage it myself," the guy thought, illuminating his way with the flashlight. Igor found the desired alley without any problems. Referring to the numbering of the graves, the guy was inexorably approaching burial number 217. Approaching the desired, relatively fresh tombstone, Igor looked around. Of course, there was not a soul around. The guy automatically glanced at the dial of his wristwatch and noted the time 1954. Only 6 minutes remained before the meeting with the killer named Bloody Valentine, and the realization of this, quite naturally, deprived the guy of peace. Igor, immersed in sad thoughts, did not even notice how a dark figure separated from the nearest stone stele and quickly approached him from behind. At the last moment, having heard the treacherous crunch of snow under his feet, Igor turned around sharply and saw a hunched figure in an old hockey mask in front of him. The killer pulled his thin hands to the guy, which in a second should have closed on his thin neck. Realizing what awaits him now, Igor instinctively recoiled, and at the same second he took out his father's injury from his pocket. There was a characteristic pop and a tight rubber bullet hit the attacker in the chest. Of course, if in the hands of Igor Titi, his offender would never have met his old age. And so, the bullet only left a painful hematoma on the killer's chest, which made him bend into a ram's horn from a sharp pain. Triumphantly, Igor was already preparing to consolidate his success with a shot in the head, when the attacker suddenly pleaded. "Stop it, Igor. Are you completely crazy? You don't understand jokes?" The voice of the killer seemed to the guy painfully familiar. Tearing off his mask, Igor suppressed a surprised sigh with difficulty. "You. Kolyan, what are you doing here?" "Yes, I am. Me. You see for yourself. I wanted to play a fool on you. You just divorced me with this Black Valentine." Bent over in pain, whispered Kolya. Igor turned pale and immediately put the injury in his pocket. "What are you talking about anyway? Did you send me this Valentine this morning?" the guy asked, trembling with excitement. Igor already began to guess what exactly happened. Most likely, for some reason, Kolya decided to play it and sent a Black Valentine handwritten by him. But who then wrote exactly the same Valentine to him himself? "Did you get something like that too?" Igor immediately exclaimed. Kolyan looked at him with an uncomprehending look and, smiling bewilderedly, said, "Yes, I found a Black Valentine in the mailbox this morning. I had to burn it after reading it. It also said something about my parents. Like, if I don't come to the cemetery by the appointed time, then by tomorrow morning I'll be an orphan. I thought it was you who decided to play a prank on me. So I sent you the same homemade Valentine. I even left the number of the grave the same. I think that if you come, then you have read the topic and, having appreciated my joke, you will show up at the cemetery for laughter." Igor turned even more pale and only now realized what had actually happened. Kolya apparently received the real Black Valentine, but deciding that this was a prank, he sent exactly the same message to his best friend. That is, to him. Igor. And now, thanks to Kolya's stupidity, they stood in the middle of the cemetery and waited for the arrival of the real killer, nicknamed Bloody Valentine. As soon as Igor had time to think about it, heavy steps were heard behind him. By and large, it was just a crunch of ice under the heels of someone's heavy boots. But the guy had enough of it. Turning around, Igor saw someone's dark silhouette, which suddenly waved his hand sharply, and at the same moment, the guy felt the whistle of something heavy on his skin, which, having come into contact with Kolya's flesh, made him scream from wild pain. Igor no longer had time to pull out the injury, as well as to flee. Glancing in the direction of Kolya, the guy immediately saw a huge axe stuck into his right leg. The throw was so strong that it practically deprived the guy of the ability to move. Blood gushed from the open wound, causing unimaginable suffering to Kolya. Igor tried to gather his strength and rush in the other direction, but the killer did not doze off and almost immediately knocked him down with a blow from a massive club that had previously hung on his side. The guy's consciousness became clouded and, balancing on the verge of consciousness and fainting, he collapsed, as if he had been mowed down on the trampled snow of the city cemetery. The killer groaned gutturally and, going up to burial number 217, looked at the profile engraved on the stone. Then, the big man closed his eyes and thought back to his past, which seemed to him so far away to be continued.